The combined Senate Study Committee on Artificial Intelligence, along with my co-chairman from the House, who is chairing the Subcommittee on Artificial Intelligence for the Georgia House of Representatives. We're thrilled to be here this morning in beautiful Augusta, Georgia. The first thing we typically do in every meeting, and we're going to continue that today, is to start out and have a blessing. So if you would bow your heads with me. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with all these individuals who bring expertise and are trying to help all of our families and our businesses and our governments here in Georgia and protect them. Lord, we just ask you bless this conversation, this meeting. For your holy name, we make our prayer. Amen. I want to ask Mr. Michael Schaffer to come up and give us a welcome from Augusta. Come on down.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Albers and members of the committee. And the guest, Dr. King, the president of Augusta University, regrets he is unable to be here with us today, but asked if I'd bring welcome. So welcome to Augusta. And, Augusta's known for 1 year out of the year of the Augusta National. We have a small tournament called the Masters. So 1 year, 1 week out of the year, the world is looking on us. But also welcome to Augusta University, which is the home of the Georgia Cyber Innovation and Training Center, where we like to say that the world is looking on us 52 weeks out of the year. It is here at this facility where you will find both government and academia and industry coming together to solve some of our nation's challenges when it comes to cybersecurity. And so with that, appreciate your support of creating this wonderful campus and the support that you continually give us. I'd like to talk about, while the government and the industry are certainly important, one of our best resources that we have here are the students. That is the future workforce. That's the ones that, as we think about it, and we're the only facility in the state of Georgia where you have both the technical college system and the university system together in one building studying. And if you're on a break today and you're out, or as you're leaving and you're on the second floor, look around and you'll see those students. And as within this environment, if they're able to study their courses, walk out of their classroom and go down the hall and do an internship with one of our industry partners that are here. But while we call it internship, we look at it, they are a lot longer, and we look at it eventually as training, where they're getting that hands-on experience. So again, we welcome you. Thank you for the great work that y'all do for the state of Georgia all year long, but certainly for this committee as y'all are looking at the effects of the citizens of this state on AI. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate you so much. Then I'm going to ask our very own Senator Max Burns to give us a welcome to this area of the state. He represents a good portion of the surrounding areas. So Senator, right there, please join us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Welcome to the most beautiful part of Georgia, CSR. I am the privilege representing the 23rd Senate District, which is a portion of Richmond County, South Richmond County, a large portion of Columbia County, South Columbia, and about 9 other counties, east, west, and south. So we're delighted to be at Cyber. I want you to know this is the hub of education and entrepreneurship for not only this region, but for Georgia. We appreciate Dr. Russell King and his work at AU. We certainly appreciate Cyber Center and Michael Schaffer and his work. And we're looking to ensure that as we work on a committee to determine the future of AI in our state, that we gain the input from this region and the expertise that we enjoy. So Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing the committee to Augusta. Thank you for allowing us to gain some insights from these individuals, and I want to share the comments of Michael Schaffer and welcome you to Augusta University and to Augusta, Georgia, and to the CSRA. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. And I remember our very first meeting, you said, we've got to go to Augusta.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. Next, we have our chairman of the House Committee. I want to turn it over to Representative Brad Thomas, who chairs the subcommittee for some comments and welcome. We're going to co-chair this meeting together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very excited to be here today. I would thank Augusta University for having us and letting us use this absolutely gorgeous facility. It's really, really impressive. Otherwise, it's got a lot of testimony today, so we'll get into it.
All right, thank you. And before we jump into that, I want to say a very special thank you to Ashton Blackwood over here. I will tell you that anytime something happens in Augusta, this young lady makes it happen. She is the go-to person. We really couldn't do these things without her. So Ashton, thank you. We really appreciate the great work you continue to do for us each and every day. Thank you. All right, as we get started today, for some opening comments, I want to make sure everyone knows that there is a website set up under the Senate side, and I believe the House is working on one as well. But if you want to go to the Georgia General Assembly website, you will click on study committees and you will see SR 476, which created this. There's a copy of the legislation as well as the site where you can see presentations and information of prior meetings that we've had, as well as you can submit testimony. In all the meetings we're going to have, we certainly cannot hear from each and every Georgian, but we want to. And there is a mechanism on that website for you to submit your testimony directly through the website, or you're more than welcome to reach out to any one of us individually. And I've got here next to me, Mr. Will Spencer in my office, who is really quarterbacking and project managing this process from our side. So again, we want to hear from each and every one of you. I also want to talk briefly about upcoming meetings. We are going to have 2 more meetings coming up just next month in October. The next one's going to be a virtual meeting. So for our committee members and all attendees, you will get links to that, and that will specifically be focusing on international as well as K-12 education. Then I'm excited that on October the 23rd, we'll be at Iron Horse Farm outside of Athens. As most people may remember, agriculture is our largest industry in the state of Georgia. And the use of AI and technology is really making a difference there. We'll also be looking at workforce challenges. In that meeting, we'll be hearing from the Georgia Agriculture Commissioner, our very own Tyler Harper. And then we will have our second to last meeting on November the 8th. That will be likely at Emory Hospital in Atlanta. We'll be focusing on healthcare as well as public safety. And our final meeting is going to be held in December, on December the 4th. That will be back at the Capitol. At that point, we will have a final report that we will discuss and vote on to be submitted, as well as I'm going to ask some of our largest corporations to come in and talk about some of the things that they are doing on their own that will. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and jump into our speakers. Our very first one is from TechNet. Renzo, so come down to the podium, and we look forward to hearing from you today.
Thank you all very much for having me. Despite being part of a tech trade association, I still like to do things a little manually. So I'm going to organize my papers a little. Oh, this one. Okay, perfect. All right. All right. Again, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Renzo Soto. I'm the Executive Director at TechNet for Texas and the Southeast. A quick introduction of TechNet. We're the national bipartisan network of technology CEOs and senior executives from a range of dynamic American businesses that operates here in the United States as well as throughout the world. And we're in a wide range of fields. AI, of course, being one of them, but we also represent folks in the gig and sharing economies, healthcare, fintech, cybersecurity, name anything that deals with technology. One of our members likely covers it. I am on the state team at TechNet. We engage directly with policymakers on bills in every single state throughout the country, as well as in Puerto Rico. We also have a federal team who engages with Congress. So I believe that y'all should be seeing a copy of my written materials. And I'll be clicking through that for y'all so you can follow along as well. I'm glad to be here in the great state of Georgia to talk about AI technologies. Also because it's really hot in my home state of Texas right now. So the reprieve from the weather has been really nice. We truly believe that we are on the cusp of the next industrial revolution. And that's why we're appreciative of the intentional efforts of your committees to first study the issue and really get to know the nuts and bolts. We're grateful for the invite today, as our members have been leaders on the responsible development and deployment of these AI technologies that have captured the world's attention. But our members have also been at the forefront of AI that we've long been familiar with, things like traffic navigation or security for your homes or your mobile devices. So today I'll be covering 3 areas for y'all. We'll start with some use cases to help contextualize things, then move to an in-depth discussion of how industry has approached data privacy and cybersecurity issues within AI. And finally, we have policy principles that we'd ask you to consider as you craft your recommendations. So starting first with the use cases, we operate the AI for America initiative that educates the public about the benefits of AI. Through this work, we've learned about the expansiveness of these technologies and the potential that they bring. It's particularly going to be true here in Georgia, given its thriving tech industry. Just last year, Georgia was a top 10 state in the country in terms of net tech employment, net tech job gains, as well as job postings for tech companies. So starting first with healthcare, AI has the potential to alleviate virtually any issue faced by the sector. One of our members, NetApp, for example, has created solutions that help with administrative overhead, allowing for more efficient data collection. And ultimately, this helps to streamline administration and even helps with real-time diagnoses by ensuring providers not only have the data that they need to have accurate diagnosis, but also it frees up their time away from data collection tasks and data input tasks so that they can focus on healthcare delivery. Disease identification is yet another area seeing benefits from AI. DeepMind's AlphaMistSense AI model, for example, allows researchers and scientists to identify actual abnormalities within the human DNA code, start to see trends within those, and allows for more accurate determinations through the research of when such abnormalities are pathogenic versus when they're just benign. There are also patient-centric AI like Helpavana's AI Navigator that's powered by OpenAI. The Navigator is dedicated to the fight against HIV and provides patients with information about the resources that are available to them. And then moving on to the transportation and manufacturing industries, we're seeing a lot of improvements in those industries because of AI right here in Georgia. In transportation, for example, Delta Airlines created a new customer service tool using Amazon Bedrock that's able to navigate all sorts of questions from folks from simple to complex. In manufacturing, Georgia Pacific uses Amazon SageMaker to monitor and provide actionable information on things like optimal machine speeds so that they can prevent costly tears and breaks as the manufacturer processes hundreds of paper and tissue parent rolls every day. And of course, AI is going to be crucial in education and workforce development. Y'all have already heard from different higher ed institutions about how they're working with AI and bringing those students into their courses. As more and more AI applications and solutions are created, the need for our current students to be well-versed in the ethical and effective use of AI will only increase. Unfortunately, there are already multiple AI tools that have been deployed in education and workforce development. For K-12 students, AI is helping personalize their learning, engaging them in ways that are more interesting to them. Chegg, for example, has created a personalized learning assistant that can help students one-on-one with their learning. In higher ed, in addition to the work of institutions, colleges, and universities, industry is also helping to develop different types of programs, courses, credential opportunities, many of which are widely available online. These help to distill the most up-to-date knowledge and skills directly from industry into the hands of students of all ages, ranging from young learners all the way up to adults who need to reskill and upskill. And there are tools meant to help job seekers and employers as well. AI is helping to better organize and address issues like skills mismatches by helping match individual skills and experiences on a one-to-one basis with employers, depending on what they're looking for. Helps cut down on the more manual work that's currently done by employers and job seekers alike. So all of these different AI solutions operate at various levels using different models, different parameters, different rules, different guardrails. But the common thread between all of them is that they all rely on high quality data. You've heard it several times that data is foundational to advanced AI systems. And because of this, careful attention to data privacy and cybersecurity is being taken by industry right now, because it's extremely important to the responsible and effective development and deployment of AI technologies. As we now talk about data privacy and cybersecurity, it's crucial to note that these are really two sides of the same coin. A more secure AI system or tool is one that is also respective of privacy. This is why our members enact strong data privacy and cybersecurity practices and standards, and also why they continue to innovate in this space. The first thing we'd like for you to consider today is our recommendation that data privacy and cybersecurity proposals be interoperable. I believe that this is already familiar to all of you here. Senator Albers, for example, the work that you did last session on data privacy is testament to that, as you work to provide consumer rights that are strong, but also allow companies who operate, not only in the United States, but throughout the world to be able to easily comply. So I will say our federal team does continue to advocate for a federal data privacy framework that is preferable, as it provides consistency and uniformity to businesses and consumers alike throughout the country. But in absence of that, there are existing state level frameworks that are generally interoperable. We think this is not only helpful for businesses, but also for consumers, as they'd be able to more easily exercise their data privacy rights. We think this is also important because one of our AI policy principles at TechNet is that a comprehensive, interoperable data privacy law should precede AI regulations. In states who've enacted such a framework, just like other online services, AI systems are subject to those requirements. In states where there are established consumer rights, for example, those would apply to the outputs of AI systems as well. By enacting such a framework first, it helps provide clarity to businesses and consumers on the expectations that the state has relating to data privacy and how consumers may exercise the rights that they might have. Likewise, cybersecurity laws must also be interoperable. It shouldn't be a surprise that industry takes cybersecurity extremely seriously, as the data used for AI systems is extremely valuable both monetarily and operationally for companies. Cyber criminals and foreign actors are a looming threat, and our members appropriately respond by ensuring they take the utmost care of their own data as well as consumers' data. Introducing misalignment through cybersecurity proposals that aren't interoperable could threaten the security that industry currently employs, and it could also disincentivize innovation within this space. The last policy consideration that we would raise for you on this topic is the importance of leveraging existing authorities already afforded by state regulations and rules that are on the books. We believe this would help raise the use of AI within certain sectors up to the same standards that humans are currently held up to. We have seen state agencies successfully do this without needing legislation. So for example, in my home state of Texas, our Department of Insurance has been notifying regulated insurers within the state that they are responsible for the accuracy of the data that they use for claims, ratings, underwriting. And they've explicitly stated that data in AI systems and tools that are used by insurers are subject to that duty of care. The agency also uses their existing enforcement actions with AI systems the same as they would with other non-AI systems, like looking at the results of models, asking questions about the data that is used, and responding appropriately if the data is determined to be faulty. This consistency helps avoid the potential for duplicative or conflicting requirements that could lead to confusion among regulated constituents and risking harms to consumers. I'm sorry about that. So what does this really all look like in practice? It needs to be noted that uniform industry standards are still a work in progress, given that some of these are relatively nascent technologies. Our members are on the leading edge of this work. For example, with the Cloud Security Alliance, our members and their workers are bringing together cybersecurity practitioners across the industry. Leaders and staff throughout the country are coming together to build meaningful standards and best practices, and they're also discussing things like a standard way, just a standard language, of talking about these issues in more technical ways that experts understand, as well as in layman's terms, so that consumers and customers are not left behind. This creates a great feedback loop in turn, where not only practitioners, but also consumers and businesses that are outside of the tech industry are helping to raise questions that can then be inserted into discussions as folks look for solutions. But that's not to say that there are not already industry efforts in play. There are many robust data privacy and cybersecurity policies in place within industry, some of which are more entrenched given best practices that apply to all technologies or data generally already exists. So we want to bring some of these to your attention, starting first with data hygiene, which is of course crucial. Some ways that TechNet members ensure the security and quality of their data include pre-cleaning. so that undesirable, violative, or illegal outputs are mitigated right from the onset. Part of this work entails identifying potential harms within the data, like identifying whether there might be risks for bias, for example. Companies also consider whether there's personal information within their data so that it can either be removed or anonymized as appropriate. This type of management also translates into the model design aspects of the work taken by companies. Things like placing parameters, rules, and guardrails within the systems themselves serves as another check against bad outputs. Some ways that companies do this is by integrating consumer privacy into systems design through strategies like rigorous training, filter development, and cleaning outputs so that systems reject requests for sensitive or personal information and also prevent personal information from showing up in outputs. Companies also employ human feedback into machine learning processes so that there are actual eyes on the outputs and feedback from humans before the models are actually deployed. By integrating several layers of protections into the data and the systems, companies develop more secure privacy considerations. Next, providing transparency is another important action taken by our members. This includes releasing comprehensive data privacy policies so that everybody can see how a company is handling their data. Comprehensive cybersecurity policies are also in place internally so that all of their employees know the appropriate and expected handling of data, and so that development of systems capabilities, whether they're planned, ongoing, or exigent, always fall in line with expected security protocols. This includes things like who actually has access to the data, since it may be the case that not everyone in a team may need to have that access. And for those who do have access, processes like authentication processes that are placed so that access is always secure no matter who is accessing the data. Companies who do business with vendors and customers also have accessible policies so that there's no misuse of developers or deployer systems. Things like terms of service agreements detail what is and isn't misuse. They have dedicated trust and safety teams as well who actively monitor for potential misuse, provide technical assistance to customers, and even in some cases create classifiers for customer use cases so that potential violations can be proactively detected. And the way that that works is essentially they work on a one-to-one basis with those use cases. They classify them based on what the actual use case is, and if it violates some of the rules or some of the codes and parameters that are already placed within that system, it flags it for the developer or the deployer so that it rises to the top in terms of attention. So as I noted earlier, there are existing data privacy and cybersecurity standards that already apply to AI systems. I'm sure y'all are familiar with resources like the NIST cybersecurity framework and the AI risk management framework from NIST as well. In addition, they have more recently released, just back in July, an AI risk management framework for generative AI, as well as other resources. So as these are adopted and adapted by industry, we'll see how effective they are, the feedback from which will be helpful to future policymaking. And of course, there are AI tools out there that are tailored to ensuring security and privacy. Just for the sake of time, I'll point you to the written materials where those examples are. And then lastly, there is research and collaboration among industry, academia, and government. And our members have been glad to contribute to that growing body of work. So as I hope you've seen, there's a lot of potential with AI, and to secure this potential, our members are taking the lead in responsible development and deployment. We do recognize, however, that there are genuine risks and they need to be addressed. And that's why there are already strategies in place by industry to proactively address those issues. So in addition to all of the data privacy and cybersecurity practices that I just highlighted, those strategies include rigorous testing based on levels of risk, collaboration between industry, academia, and government when those risks are identified, allowing for independent reviews of the systems, and prioritizing research on identified risks. As you all contemplate recommendations, we appreciate opportunities like today where lawmakers and policymakers actively seek out the ongoing work of industry. We do believe that rushing to regulations can have real impacts on the innovative work. And we highly encourage achieving a delicate balance between safeguarding against potential harms and encouraging innovation. To this end, just like in data privacy, our federal team is hard at work for advocating for a federal framework on AI. But absent that, we again recommend interoperability across states. And to achieve this, our members and our organization have developed a robust set of policy principles on AI that are in our written testimony. Please note that we are currently going through an annual process to update these. We do update all of our policy principles every year. And given the huge surge of interest in AI this year, we expect that there will be changes to some of these principles, which we'd be glad to provide to the committee once that process is over. So I'm not going to read through all of them for the sake of time, but I will highlight a few for you. avoid blanket prohibitions on artificial intelligence, machine learning, or other forms of automated decision-making, reserve any restrictions only for specific identified use cases that present a clearly demonstrated risk of unacceptable harm, and narrowly tailor those requirements to the harms identified. Do not force developers or deployers of AI or ML to share publicly information that is either proprietary or protected, and don't require an AI registry. Ensure safety and security of information by ensuring data retention requirements are appropriately scoped to need and clearly defined by law. And then lastly, limit enforcement to the relevant state agencies and avoid private rights of action. Ensure any enforcement actions limit damage awards to clearly cognizable forms of actual demonstrated harms directly resulting from violations of the law. And I just want to underscore this point is particularly important, as we do believe that frivolous lawsuits could significantly derail the work of a company to innovate. So I would be remiss if I did not note finally that some of these principles could be best achieved through some further study. The NIST studies, for example, will be illuminating and helpful to some of these policy principles in terms of how they'll actually be enacted in practice. In addition to the AI risk management framework for generative AI, NIST has also released a secure software development framework, a plan for global engagement on AI standards, and an initial draft for managing misuse risks on dual use foundation models. And our members have been glad to be partners with NIST in these processes, and our federal team has been engaged in them as well. We highly recommend taking a look at those studies, as policy proposals would benefit from these stakeholder-driven efforts. So that's all I have for you today. I know it was a lot. Grateful for the genuine time, attention to this issue. We want to be a resource to you going forward. And so if any and all questions that you have, I'd be happy to take them.
And thank you, Renzo. I appreciate that great testimony. You mentioned something that I think we talk about regularly in this committee is how do we look forward and without stifling innovation, put those proper guardrails in place, if you will, to do that. And today's meeting is focusing really on two main areas, which is both the cybersecurity part of AI as well as data protection. And drilling down on data privacy and protection for a moment, we agree that we would love to have one uniform standard for all 50 states. Unfortunately, we also believe that's probably not going to happen anytime in the near future, which is why we are working on it. Is there a particular state or set of states that you think has solved that problem and has a good balance in data privacy?
So there are a handful of states that have generally achieved the interoperability that I mentioned. And there are, differences between some of them. But generally speaking, we look to states like Virginia, Utah, Texas, Tennessee, all of those states have generally a lot of the same language. Businesses, because some of them have already been enacted for a couple of years, already know how to comply with those laws. Consumers within those states know how to access their rights as well. And so there's really a well-oiled machine within those states in terms of how that all works out in practice. And like I said, because AI systems, just like any other technology, is a technology that uses data. Generally speaking, the rights and requirements within those laws generally apply to the AI system. So, as you tackle AI regulations, taking a look at some of those interoperable data privacy models that are comprehensive helps to capture what folks are trying to do within AI systems as well.
That's fantastic. Questions from committee members? Fred, go ahead.
Are there any particular decisions across the states in the US that maybe I've gone a little bit too far, that from your perspective, I've put undue burden on smaller companies?
Sure. And is that just in data privacy or just in general?
In the context of data privacy and cybersecurity.
Got it.
To this topic.
Yeah. So there are some states that are novel in terms of their approach to data privacy. For example, this year, I believe it was the state of Vermont who had an update to their data privacy proposal actually vetoed by the governor because it allowed for a lot of trepidation for businesses in terms of what the enforcement would actually look like. And it unlocked things like, I believe there was a private right of action in there, which was a big concern for industry. And so those are kind of some of the things that we take a look at. And then there are also some proposals here in the Southeast that look at constraining data privacy requirements to only a handful of companies. And because of that, there's a heightened form of scrutiny that has been placed on them by some of those states. And so, as they are complying with data privacy requirements in all of the other states, they have to take attention, like special care within those states to meet some of those more special requirements, like verifying the ages of users, for example, who want to access their systems. that requires a lot of potentially data privacy invasive practices. And so those, we engage more closely on because we want to be able to be sure that the consumers within those states actually are able to enjoy the same rights as their peers in other states.
Great question. Pascal?
Yes, thank you for the very interesting presentation. I think one of the things that I see a lot is that when we talk about data, it seems that this is something which is static. And as you know, data is evolving constantly, and the more you release data over time, the more difficult the privacy aspects become. So in the frameworks that you have you seen any mentions of the difficulty in actually addressing the fact that if you train AI system, the data is going to evolve constantly, the privacy issues are going to grow, even the reliability issues are going to grow. Have you seen any of the frameworks, any of the policies addressing those issues?
So I think we're still studying that because, although the rights within states who have comprehensive data privacy laws do apply to the AI systems, we're mostly taking a look at the outputs of those. I think we need to take a more careful and delicate, balanced approach whenever we're talking about the inputs of data systems, which I assume that's what you're referring to. So for that one, I think I'd have to take a look back and talk to my members about how they each individually approach those. And in some cases, it's hard to get an answer because a lot of that is IP. And it's how they remain competitive in terms of the way that they develop their AI systems and their capabilities. But generally speaking, like I said, some of the things that we take a look at to make sure that we have rules and parameters in place that don't violate the privacy of individuals is looking at things like the pre-cleaning that I mentioned, making sure that there's no personal information. So there are, kind of this foundation baseline actions that are taken by industry pretty widely.
Okay, any further questions? We also have a few members online, and if you are online, if you'll click the raise your hand button, we'll ask someone in our Senate press office to alert us that you may have a question. Any other questions for committee members? Senator Burns.
Again, following up on data privacy, cybersecurity, integrity, we talked about, you mentioned the fact that there are some examples of states that adopt certain parameters, certain guidelines. TechNet's an international organization.
We're national, sir.
Sorry?
National.
That was my clarification, because I wanted to see if you had insights across national boundaries, Canada or the EU. Are you seeing things there that you should emulate or things that you should avoid? Do you have any insights on that?
So, and I know this committee heard from the onset about, what the EU AI Act looks like. And it's really tough to nail down exactly what all is going to be required over there. Because not only, their process lasted over several years, resulted in I think it's multi-hundreds pages of paperwork that has come out of that, much of which is technical documentation. And then that documentation itself is probably going to revise over the next several years in terms of the application of those rules and requirements. And so that is constantly changing. And with that comes, the changing feedback from our member companies in terms of, okay, here's what's working out in the EU versus what we would prefer to be taken as an American approach. But in terms of, the details of all of that, I'll consult with my federal team to see if they have some resources, and I'll follow up with the committee.
Thank you. We'll do one final question from Chairman Thomas.
Thank you. I've noticed on the bullet of the page where you kind of list out your policy. I see the term risk used a lot. Specifically, high risk uses and requirements on those. Risk-based frameworks, which is like third from the bottom. It sounds like to me you have a preference to like an EU style model where there's a hierarchical structure of and requirements based off of how it impacts to human life is that
Yes, yeah,
correct? So open source. What's your opinion on open source from software or any of these AI software models?
Yeah, so our members engage in both open and closed source systems. So I don't think we have a uniform stance on exactly which is preferred because the benefits there are benefits for both types. And so generally speaking, I think when we approach comprehensive AI regulations, it's like you said, we try to take a look at risks. And as you all know, some of the proposals that have gone on throughout the country, rather than focusing on open versus closed source, they try to denote, what is an AI system that relates to a consequential decision as opposed to those that, maybe have a human in the loop and the decisions are really made by humans. And so a lot of our work throughout the states has been more on more finely tailoring what is a consequential decision versus what is not. And so far, that has worked for our members. But, we do have some resources in open versus closed source that I'll send to the committee as well.
We do have one final question. Senator Estevez is online. If we can get him unmuted. Senator?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not have a question. I was just putting my thumbs up when you had given.
Hang on 1 second, Senator. We need to turn your volume up just one moment. All right, try that again, please.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually did not have a question. I just was putting my thumb up based on your instruction, saying that I acknowledged your instruction to raise my hand if I had a question.
Senator, we are unfortunately having some technical difficulties of hearing your question through. No question? Okay. All right, he was just testing. All right, we're good to go. Thank you so much, Renzo. We appreciate it.
Thank y'all very much.
Okay, so our next speaker is going to be Ernesto Cortez. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you. Thank you. How do you hear me? Hey, good morning, Honorable Chairman Albers, distinguished members of the committee to study artificial intelligence, data protection, data privacy implications of its use and applications. My name is Ernesto Cortez. I'm a national security consultant with Booz Allen Hamilton. I work about 100 feet from here on the 3rd floor of the Schaffer McCartney building. I greatly appreciate your time and the committee's interest in this field. I'd like to personally thank you all for your leadership on this important and exciting topic. I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited about K-12 education on the same topic as well. I'd like to thank our hosts at the Georgia Cyber Innovation and Training Center and Augusta University. I saw Mr. Eric Toller on the way in here and met Mr. Michael Schaffer for the first time today, which is a real treat. Thank you for, I work in his building, the building that bears his name. So I'm very appreciative of the work that's gone in there. This building itself is a very special place. At Booz Allen Hamilton, we have recognized the power of this very ecosystem centered around this pair of buildings. That's why we're proud to be resident partners here in the Innovation and Training Center. When I was still serving in the Army just a few years ago, not far from here on Fort Eisenhower, I spent 2 years as an intelligence brigade commander and 2 years as the chief of staff of Army Cyber. I had the opportunity to meet many government leaders from Georgia and South Carolina. And when it came time for questions, data rights and data privacy would inevitably be a very hot topic. And that has not changed. I visited your Senate page for this study. I saw that the scope of the study includes concerns about potential misuse, unintended consequences, the need to develop and implement ethical standards to preserve our individual's dignity, autonomy, and self-determination. And I think those are amazing goals. So thank you. I was able to view on YouTube this committee's 3rd session from last month, where you all covered the topics of artificial intelligence in the film industry, name, image, likeness, and the impressive smart city capabilities that are being implemented in Atlanta. I watched that video through the lens of today's focus, which is data privacy. It was not lost on me what a significant task it is, as greater and greater volumes and variety of data is being collected with each passing day. It can be a daunting task for any of us if we try to eat the whole elephant all at once. So how do we do it? We do it government, industry, academia, one bite at a time. As each new technology is developed, it would be prudent for the design and data safeguards to be baked into the very DNA of the design as early as possible. As new systems are fielded, new data transport architecture, as new short-term storage, long-term, and cold storage is developed, security must be baked into the DNA of those things early. To use a brief example from your presentation last month on the smart city, a smart city anywhere in the world is collecting troves of data. As some of the examples last month, there's sensors on your self-driving cars, your self-driving spin, razor, two-wheelers. There's sensors and cameras in your intersections. And the data, whether it's LiDAR data, optical cameras, object-based detection, that data in this example is being used for safety. The primary purpose of that data is to avoid a car running into you. So the time requirement for that data storage may be very short term. By the end of the day, or even sooner, that data may be deleted, purged, and zeroized, not transmitted, not stored, never sent to a long-term facility. So your requirements in your city to protect that data and safeguard it are significantly reduced. But perhaps our smart city, there's a secondary use for all of that data. For the self-driving cars, the intersection cameras, perhaps local law enforcement would like to access that data sometime in the future, days, weeks, months later, in support of some investigation following a terrorist attempt. Now your security requirements to protect this data increase significantly. The images of your face, the faces of your families, may be stored at the point of the sensor where it's collected. They may be transported via hardline, wirelessly, on diverse pathways that you may not fully understand or control. Then it'll be stored somewhere for some amount of time. It becomes data at rest, hopefully encrypted, where it has different subset of vulnerabilities to our privacy that normally just increase over time as long as it's stored. And someday when you delete it, it has to be deleted in a proper manner. The leaders of this smart city can just keep all that data forever, cataloging more and more data, tagging and associating it, associating those objects to users, times, places, yourselves, the members to each other. And as that increases, the increase for privacy and the concerns increase drastically. The Chinese do this better than anyone. Their famous COVID tracking systems and their social credit systems use facial recognition to give you a real-time grade. So you would all have a different grade of how good a citizen you are. They issue penalties for you when you're jaywalking in real time. They represent an extremely capable data management system that ignores any semblance of individual rights or privacy. That's one end of the spectrum. These are the challenges we collectively face, and industry can play an important role in the process of meeting and overcoming these challenges. Fundamentally, a lot of these conversations about data can be boiled down to sit under a single word, and that is trust. And we try to determine if we trust a system, and we ultimately have a balancing act that most of you have probably heard before, between two characteristics of our data: data availability. Do I have the data when I want it? My boarding pass for my airplane. I really want that on time. So you want it to be available, but you also want it to be secure from those who you don't want to see your data. And that's a constant trade-off and a constant balancing act that we all grapple with. And how we achieve the ideal balance, if there is an ideal balance, and it changes, it shifts back and forth. Many experts in the field say we achieve balance through the application of two things. The first, which is, I would submit, why we're all here today, is data governance. Data governance deals with policies, roles, things that our colleague was just speaking about before me. Policies, roles, responsibilities, standards. These are good things most of the time. Policies and regulations save us from anarchy. Their existence likely makes our privacy and security go up, which is good. So these policies and standards are our friends until they slow down or block your availability of that data to an unacceptable level. And I think we've all seen examples of that. A simple example of a non-controversial standard or rule that I don't think anybody would argue with is the existence of your social security number. So when data is being screened and cataloged, when we come across PII, like your social security number, that data will be masked. We take the Privacy Act of 1974, we take all the rules in there, and we implement it to make sure that your PII, your personally identifiable information, is masked. Very simple, right? We do the same as we have legislation to mask financial data, medical data, and we ensure that that is protected. These are rules that we all can agree upon, and it's useful sometimes when we can't agree on something to go back to the simple social security numbers, financial data, medical data. We agree those should be masked, and then we can start the dialogue from there. The second way that we achieve trust in our data after data governance was data management. I've seen it described many different ways, that if governance is the blueprint for the house that we're building, data management is how we actually build the house and operate it every day. How we run it, how we control it in such a manner that allows that data to be collected, stored, organized, processed, and delivered to the client who ultimately wants it. My background is in military intelligence. For years, we wanted to get the data that the commanders on the ground needed to protect their forces and to prosecute our adversaries. We had to get it to them in the right format at the right time for them to make a better decision. So in the context of all these challenges, I think there's some good news and there's some bad news, and I'm going to start with the bad. The bad news, which is no surprise to anybody on the committee, is that we look at the 5 V's of data: the volume, the velocity, and the variety of the data is increasing every day because we're producing, collecting, and gathering more data. While the veracity of that data can be clouded nowadays by intentional misinformation, intentional disinformation, by the deep fakes that you talked about last month in your hearing with the curious case of Benjamin Buttons. The veracity of data can be challenged by the drift of some of the AI models that you've heard about, where we've seen ChatGPT this year may process math problems slightly less good, less accurately than it did a year ago, as the AI models drift and have to be corrected. And that brings us to the 5th V of value that provides a challenge, the 5th V that provides a challenge, and that's value. How do we derive value from all of this data once we have collected it, cleaned it, structured it, tagged it, and stored it? How we derive value from the data is a rhetorical question right now. Our quest for the answer to that should motivate us each day. So on to the good news. The good news is that through a whole of nation approach, industry, academia, government, private companies, we have significant resources. Industry, like my company, Booz Allen Hamilton, academia, Georgia Tech, Augusta University, government, state, federal, the military, Army Cyber Center of Excellence, Army Cyber Command, just 12 miles from here, and research institutions like Savannah River National Labs, and private entities. The partnerships and possibilities amongst these groups are great and vast. There are startups joining us each day, jumping into the fray. None of us need to tackle these tasks and challenges alone. There's turnkey services that can deliver everything that we need, everything that a particular client needs as a service. Fill in the blank, as a service. If you want data to go to the cloud, the big cloud service providers like Amazon, Microsoft, Google can provide organic security, controls, encryption, whatever you want. They can probably create a boutique solution. An example of this is that Booz Allen has joined some of the nation's leading AI stakeholders in a Department of Commerce initiative supporting development and deployment of trustworthy and safe AI. Established by the U.S. Commerce Department's NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, this AI Safety Institute Consortium will bring together AI creators and users, academics, government, and industry researchers, civil organizations to meet this mission collectively. The members of this consortium represent some of our nation's largest companies. It represents innovative startups and the creators of some of the world's most advanced AI systems and hardware. They're on the front lines of developing and using the AI systems. Some members of the group include Google, OpenAI, and Amazon, and the rest of its members are published online, including civil academic teams focused on how AI can and will transform society. We at Booz Allen embrace these efforts to ensure that this technology is a force for good in the United States and the world at large. More good news. Most of these partners have significant runtime, years of hands-on experience with those two aspects, government, governance, and management of data to provide you the balance of security and availability that a given situation demands. I'm proud to say that Booz Allen has taken a leadership role on AI adoption and implementation. We're leaders in looking at the legal, moral, and ethical considerations involved in the use of data to fuel AI models. We work every day with government and military to understand their seminal documents. Last November, the DoD published their data, analytics, and AI adoption strategy in November of 2023. It serves as a form of governance, rules, standards for our delivery of AI services back to the federal government. For the third year in a row, we are the #1 provider of AI services to the federal government. This experience and the repetition it provides us allows us and other partners to mitigate risk, demystify the unknowns, and progressively grow safer capabilities through a proven playbook to design, engineer, and operationalize purpose-built AI solutions. I just want to highlight 3 sectors where we've seen delivery and success, and then I'll conclude. In the defense sector, which is, again, my background of 27 years. In future conflicts, it's essential for our warfighters to maintain an instantaneous decision advantage. Supporting this capability, artificial intelligence is critical to enabling action at the speed of the digital battle space, which will be far faster than the human ability to process and act on the incoming data. The final report of the National Security Commission on AI provides a call to action to operationalize AI across defense. In the next conflict, we will rely on the power of AI to succeed, and I believe that. In the civil sector, our work spans the full breadth of civil government, including energy and the environment, financial services, health, homeland, farmland, law enforcement, and transportation. We've developed models to predict global health threats and provide AI training and education to enable federal agencies to lead the digital transformation that they must undergo. Next month, we're partnering with the Mark Cuban Foundation to provide an AI bootcamp for students in Virginia, Hawaii, and San Diego. And next year, I'm planning to bring that bootcamp here to Augusta. Finally, again, my life's work in the intelligence community, the nation's adversaries, like our pacing threat in China, never stop innovating, and we don't either. With more data being collected, the best way to realize our data's full value is to apply artificial intelligence to support the analysts. AI enhances the ability to derive insights to support decision-making. The result can be a significant increase in efficiency and improvement in the value of the intel they produce. I'd like to close by saying that we see the potential benefits of AI to make our lives better. We assess AI will continue to proliferate throughout our everyday lives. The privacy concerns are real, which is why a deliberate, forward-thinking, repeatable process is necessary to govern deployment. But we recognize that the risk of inaction, of slow adoption, may be higher as competitors and adversaries innovate without our constraints of the rule of law. I thank you for your time.
I thank you for that testimony, and some will open up for questions.
A quick question, and let me move this because I tend to be soft-spoken. A lot of questions that we get from our clients in the industry relates now to quantum computing and the near future power of quantum computing to decrypt data sets that may have been leaked from our clients, our customers, or the industry in general. Are you doing anything in that space? How can AI help potentially to get ready for that near future?
Yeah, I mean, quantum computing is on the forefront of everybody who's concerned with encryption. Obviously, at the national level, our intel community and the folks who have our most trusted data are hyper-focused on that. Booz Allen has solid partnerships with those who are trying to develop in that space, but we have not seen, I'm not aware of any near-term breakthroughs on that front right now. We're monitoring, obviously, very closely along with the IC.
Thank you.
Outrecognized Chairman Albers.
Thank you, Chairman Thomas. You mentioned NIST, as did Renzo before you, which is obviously a great framework that's out there. Of course, there's ISO 27001 and multiple others. do you think that we need to come up with a single standard or at least a base level of what everybody should be working on in the future? Because some are using different bases as what we're looking at from a basic cyber protection, artificial intelligence, and I'm curious as to what your thoughts are.
I will say these are my personal thoughts. We should always strive for one standard in whatever topic we're talking about. It should be an aspiration, but my personal opinion was it would remain an aspirational only. There should always be a North Star, something that's guiding you towards the objective, one single standard. I mean, again, I have a lot of experience in the military. When we look across services, just trying to communicate with each other, the members are probably familiar with concepts like JADC2, where we're trying to have a single form of communication that we can cooperate across the services seamlessly. There are challenges inherent with that because various services have different structures, different systems. So I would say there should be, to answer your question very specifically, there should be a single goal that we should strive to agree upon, but I think that would be a lifelong quest. But we should not give it up because then I think it will decay even worse.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the word trust. Elaborate on that a bit, and also how do you build the trust in the general public for AI related systems?
Well, I don't know how much time we have because I could talk about trust all day. Thank you. In the context of my comments, I would say that I'll begin by saying I think trust is absolutely essential for a relationship to take place, a meaningful relationship to take place, whether it's interpersonal between organizations or between you and your data or your data provider. So once trust has broken down, then I believe we have a real uphill battle because you're not going to trust what you're looking at. You're not going to be willing to act upon it in a timely manner. So a certain amount of data may become useless if you look at it, but you're not willing to act on it. You're not willing to put resources behind it, what that data is indicating you should do. So in the context of my comments, what I meant by trust was, do you trust the data you're looking at? Do you trust some preliminary recommendations that the data or the AI may be providing you? And do you trust the government or whatever institution, a private institution is providing you with this? Do you trust the service they're providing you with? So I believe trust can break down very, very quickly. I know that members have seen this before, that whether a provider has been caught doing something they're not supposed to be doing, selling off your data, or allowing the veracity, the truthfulness, the accuracy of data to break down. I think that once that breaks down, you're frankly going to move on to another platform, another service, or another leader. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, Senator, but I think it's absolutely implicit for a relationship, again, between people or between data, applications, organizations. We've seen when the trust breaks down, that thing gets terminated meaningfully.
I appreciate bringing that concept to the table because at the end of the day, our constituencies have got to have a comfort level and a reliance level that the information they're being provided is accurate and usable.
Yes, Senator, I do apologize. There was one aspect of your question I wanted to address, and that is how do we build trust? And my experience in the military is that, and in private industry, is you cannot build trust quickly. And again, we have to look no further than our own personal relationships to know you don't just meet a new person and say, I trust you implicitly. I may trust you to borrow my car based on your rank and your position. But I may not trust you with other aspects of my life, right? So we have this small circle of trust that will expand only, I believe, over time. And after proven on the, whatever you want to call it, the battlefield or in reality or in experience. So I don't believe trust can be built up over time. I think most of us experience trust can be lost in an instant, but it takes years to truly maintain. And so to the point of your comments just now, to build something that the public will truly trust, it would take the arc of time of years, I think. And it can unfortunately be lost very quickly. And if you start to lose it, you must act rapidly and decisively to try to transparently say what happened and try to reestablish that trust.
Thank you.
With that, do we have any online questions? Going once, going twice. Just to wrap up real quick, you hit on something that is a really important topic to me in smart cities. And I really appreciate that. And this kind of rides off a little bit of Senator Burns talked about the trust. One of the things that I'm hearing more and more about throughout the state is the use of facial recognition technology and capturing that biometric data and it being stored, you know, however it gets there, whether it's on the device or as you said, you know, in a more centralized warehouse location, but database, but I also, before I said that too, I also want to say, I'm always reminded of Benjamin Franklin. He made a quote, the quote is, "Those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty or safety." What do you see the issue with trust when it comes to surveillance of people without their knowledge? I mean, I know it's a little bit of a loaded question. I don't know if everybody say the same thing, but could you kind of expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great topic. Thank you for that. And I use the example of the Chinese, their smart cities. They've got, I think, 16 cities that are almost completely wired for all of the things you're talking about. It's very Orwellian that they can monitor everything. And this concept of the citizen score is real. You get an 81 because you're not a good citizen, because it recognizes you doing things and violating pedestrian codes that you shouldn't have violated. So that's I think the extreme case of what you're talking about. Back to transparency, I think if you were going to have, let's just take a small subset of let's say Atlanta, because it was discussed last month, and let's say there are traffic cameras, facial recognition. I think the first step is providing transparency, telling the public this is generally what is going on. If I know there's a stoplight camera, those of you who've been to Europe have seen these stoplight cameras. They're detested in the United States. I think they've mostly gone away. These red light cameras that if you're speeding, you get a ticket mailed to you a few weeks later. It checks your driver's license. It's like a toll tag. I think if people know that they're there, if folks know that they're there and there's transparency, then that's the first step of trust. I think they're easier to grapple with. If I know there's a certain part of Peachtree City that has this recognition, then I think it's fair game somewhat. I go in eyes wide open, knowing what I'm dealing with. If it was obfuscated, I think that you start to lose a little bit of trust. If you go into a federal building, there could be a sign up front that says, "Hey, you're subject to search, seizure, monitoring, all of that." So you don't get a lot of complaints in a federal building that somebody's monitoring me because it's expected. Same thing in passport control, et cetera. So where you see transparency, I think you see less of a problem from the public. It's if it was obscured and done in private and secret that I think you'd have some trouble. But I think it's coming. I think it's the way of the future. I think who has access to that data. So transparency is one, and the second, and I'll end my comments. The second, I think, is who has access to that data. If you're familiar, and I'm not advocating for a certain company, but Amazon Web Services, cloud services, provide something called, and others probably provide a similar service, provide something called a clean room. So the clean room concept is, if you have access to all of this facial recognition software of everything I've been doing in Augusta for the past 6 months, I might be concerned who has access to that. If I violate some law and you get some subpoena, law enforcement may get access to that. They can step into, but I don't want them to have access about data about other parts of my life. So they can go into a clean room that Amazon can set up very quickly as an end-to-end boutique thing. And they can allow someone to see only the data subsets that they're supposed to see. And they call it a clean room. And again, I think any web service cloud provider could do that. So if the public were aware of such protections, again, the transparency, if there's a subpoena for you, if there's been some legal document that says we can seek out this data, then it will be apportioned to those who should have access to it, law enforcement. and they can only see those portions of your data. Much like a physical search warrant, except it's just.
Well, I think the concern is we don't want to march to a surveillance state, and that's a lot of feedback that I get back home. So, but I appreciate that. Actually, we have one more question. It's from one of our online members, Chairman Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To our speaker, we don't have traffic cameras, but we now have school zone speed cameras that have invaded our lives pretty well. But I know that we're getting used to data breaches. We all get letters consistently that they've had a data breach. And I guess my concern, Booz Allen has vast resources to be able to protect data and keep it safe and keep it encrypted and good stuff like that. But I worry absolutely about the small players in this who are going to try to use AI, whether it be a city, law enforcement, counties, schools, whoever, and, how they're able to keep it secure. And it doesn't end up just like we have with data breaches on all sorts of things right now. I don't know if that's a question or a statement, but I'll hear your thoughts on it. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. If you can hear me.
I think we can't hear them. And they can't hear us because I heard your question.
As to it, unfortunately. I think most folks would agree to that. As to the resources of a large company to secure their data, even the largest companies, cybersecurity, cyber defense firms have been breached by the sort of the chutzpah of our adversaries and attackers. So it is a constant concern. It is an absolute constant concern. There's certainly no one answer. We should keep hyper focused on it. I do believe in my closing comments, I was talking about at scale, a company like Booz Allen, companies like CrowdStrike, Mandiant, FireEye, people that specialize in this kind of thing, the cloud service providers, the big ones. They can find repeatable playbooks, repeatable processes, not quite one standard, but akin to single standards that I think are more repeatable. We all wear a seatbelt when we get in a car. 50 years ago, they would have thought that was crazy. How do you protect yourself in a car? So we decided on a seatbelt. It is safer. Bike helmets, same thing, it's safer. So we should strive across these organizations to find repeatable processes that can scale without adding massive cost. I don't have a solution for that, but I know industry and academia are working on it.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, I think we've solved our online issue there, so I'm hoping all the representatives and senators who are listening can hear. And again, please raise your hand if you have a question so we can follow through on that. Next, Steve Wren with Fort Eisenhower. Looking forward to hearing from you today.
Senator Albers and esteemed representatives of the Georgia Senate Study Committee on Artificial Intelligence. Thank you for the opportunity for me to be able to take the time to present to you today. First of all, Steve Moraine, I'm the Army Cyber Technology Warfare Center's director. I also have a lab with me, which is the Army Cyber Technology and Innovation Center. which happens to be located here in the Georgia Cyber Innovation and Technology and Training Center. So one, I want to also thank you for your support for this particular center. Sits inside the building next door. So the partnership we have both not only at the center, but also with Augusta University as we Army Cyber move down to Georgia has been extremely valuable. I'll talk a little bit later today about some of the things that we've been able to do with your support for the center to advance the Army.
That's great. Steve, before you continue, I'm going to ask one of the folks to maybe move the microphone a little bit closer. We're getting a little bit of echo and feedback there. It'd be a little easier for us to hear probably. Maybe you can move that. I think it's the audio that's coming through the speakers.
It's actually.
I know it's. Okay.
It's.
Whichever one it is, if we could get a little clearer, that would be better. If you don't mind. Thank you.
I'll do that. Is that better?
Yes, thank you so much.
Gentlemen, ladies, what I'd like to do right now is I want to give a little bit of a preview or a post view, if you will. In August, here at the Georgia Cyber Center and over at the Marriott Convention Center, we hosted TechNet. And this was TechNet was for the Army. It's the Army's basically technology innovations conference, which talks about how the Army is going to move forward in both the communications, the IT, cyber, and electronic warfare. And I just want to go show you a very short snippet. I'll start with that and then I'll go with that. Can you please tee that video up, please?
That's to be able and it also need to set up a person an emergency and sensor of threats. And she was able to make a short video before she had to Lieutenant General Ray Barrett.
I'm sorry that I can't be in person. I was all the way. I recorded this short video to thank everyone for all your hard work. You have heard from outstanding thinkers and leaders in cyber, signal, and electromagnetic warfare. We got a glimpse into possible futures from the Army's Chief Information Officer, Diego Garcia, and the Army G6 Lieutenant General John Morrison. They're joined by new leadership at the U.S. Army Cyber Center of Excellence, Major General Ryan Janovic, and new NetCom Commander, Major General Denise McFay. Thank you, FCO, for putting on such an excellent conference. I also want to thank Lieutenant General Maria Barrett as her avatar replacement. It's an honor to use her voice, space, and influence to prove even the experts in cyber can be fooled. What do you have to say about the whole thing? That's how accessible it is. Those of you who are actually studying deep things, remember to know how they work. That is next.
So I show that video there, just one from from a background standpoint. The only thing that was real in that is General Barrett actually sat in a car. Everything else from that, from her movements to the voice on it, was all generated by generative AI. There was a script that was put, the audio voice, you only need about 3 seconds of audio to fake somebody's voice. With inside of it, the only problem is, as good as that was, there was still one area which we had problems. We had actually used General Barrett's real voice, was the pronunciation of General Janovic. For whatever reason, or generative AI just doesn't quite get the Eastern European names quite right. General Barrett did that for purpose on site TechNet to kind of show and demonstrate to at least the Army leadership and the Army representatives there is one, the barrier of entry into, I'll say, mis and disinformation, which used to be provided by nation states at a very high level of resources. With the advent of AI has extremely lowered that barrier of entry. To the point where that video there was done with very simple open techniques right now, nothing very complicated. It also goes back to, I think, Senator, your earlier information about or question about trust. Now there's a question of not only, hey, how do you use AI to be able to be productive, but for those non-productive things, how can you tech and how can you understand the fakes out there that start to do disinformation and start to erode trust? From an Army standpoint, we look at this use of AI in a couple of general senses. From the Army standpoint, at the end of the day, AI is going to kill us on the battlefield or allow us to defeat our adversaries. That's a pretty serious effect there, is knowing that if you look at the war in Ukraine and what both the Russians and the Ukrainians are doing with the ability to do advanced targeting using artificial intelligence, that's a soldier's life on the battlefield. So for us, it is a very serious thing. That's at the Army. From an Army cyber standpoint, we're looking at it from our primary mission standpoint, which is to operate, defend our networks, attack, influence our adversaries, and then inform others. At the end of the day, Ernesto Cortez talked a little bit about a decision cycle. For us, it's really about decreasing our decision cycle, the ability to sense, understand, decide, and act. How do we reduce that as quickly as possible to get an advantage on the battlefield? At the same time, how do I increase dilemmas to an adversary to increase his decision cycle? Because he who can decide and act faster and understand the battlefield will have a distinct advantage. That applies in cyberspace as well. So what I want to shift right there, I want to give you just general context. I'm going to shift a little bit about, as we've done our research and our ventures into artificial intelligence, particularly inside the defense space. And that's what I'm going to focus on right now, is the defensive side. Several of the things that we've learned out of it, I think, that are applicable into your problem space as well, say inside the commercial and public sector as well. One is we have a tendency to overgeneralize AI. So I'll just say what ends up happening is everybody will just classify something as AI, and there's complexities of both the type and the models of deployment and the use of AI that I think are sometimes overgeneralized. The chart in front of you right now talks about some of those complexities, and I'll just say AI deployment models. If I go all the way over to the right-hand side, that is the really hard resource intensive, where you're building AI all the way from scratch. That's understanding the data sources you're doing. How do I actually build the model itself? And then figure out how I'm going to train the model and use it. That's deep resources, both time, cost, manpower to actually do that. And then to continue to curate that. That's a lot of effort. And as I move farther to the left side, that is basically a user who goes on to ChatGPT and types a prompt in, and in many cases may not even know they're actually using AI. But as we talk about AI, there's different AIs, and I'd encourage that as you consider whatever legislation for particular AIs, understanding what the target area that you're modeling and where you're trying to target that legislation is all the way on the far right, which is the build from scratch foundational model. Is it all the way on the left from the user standpoint over there, or somewhere in between? I would argue what we're doing in Army Cyber is I'm not over on the build side. I'm actually probably, and I'll talk about some of it, that I'm on the extend side. I'm leveraging a model that's already been created, and then I'm fine tuning that for my specific applications, using additional data that gives additional insight to that to kind of try to figure out exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve with that particular application of AI. The foundational piece to all that, I think the previous presenters have talked about it as well. I'll just kind of touch on it to reinforce it, is the data. So understanding the data that's available to that can have a drastic effect on, if you're not cautious on the data, and not just on the initial development of the model, but as that model is used. The models will continue to drift over time. So as you actually go and execute things, and particularly if I'm having a self-learning model, that as I inject and use it and have more data, that model then uses it. If I keep asking the same types of questions or the same type of data into it, it will eventually become biased and drift towards whatever that is. So there has to be an understanding of how do you make sure that you're doing that? How do you validate and verify that model? So we tend to look at least from our perspective, is it's not just the AI model, but how do I verify it against a knowledge graph? So the results that I get out of it, I have some way to validate and verify that what is actually coming out of that model, there's validity to that. There's a transparency aspect as well to understand not only the transparency of how the data model has been generated and developed, but also the data itself. So the transparency of the data, how it's being used, what was used to develop the model. Because in some cases if with a lack of transparency, you maybe think that it was on a generalized set. It may have been a very specific set that biased the model that as a user, I might, as I'm looking at that, it could steer me the wrong way without even knowing that. An example of that is there's a Russian model that's out in open source right now that the large language model itself is awesome. Except for the problem is when you ask it who landed on the moon first, it will tell you that the Russians landed on the moon first. Because that was trained and it was tainted. So the model itself was poisoned. Next slide, please. So I'm going to shift right now into some of the just general things that we Army Cyber are doing to advance AI. One of the areas I want to talk about is if we look at AI, there's 5 generalized types of artificial intelligence or use, not really the models themselves. So there's a visual aspect. So think computer vision, augmented reality, textual, text recognition, speech to text conversions, interactive from the chatbots, think of a chatbot standpoint, how to do smart personal assistants, functional, getting towards robotics, IoT solutions and enabling things like that. And then finally, an analytics standpoint, think about semantic analysis, assessments, and how do I be able to take large data pools and give you some cognitive understanding of those large data pools. Inside the area for our cyber, we've developed, we have a couple specific focus areas. One is called Panoptic Junction. Panoptic Junction is trying to go after advanced adversaries. What it does for us is it looks at continuous monitoring. We have an ability to take a model to understand this is what we should look like based on the artifacts. As we build systems, we develop, we basically put it inside of a large system that says, this is what our system is supposed to look like from a security standpoint. So culling through that and culling through other things, we have an ability to take a look at that model to tell us, here's what you should be monitoring. This is what you look like. These are the important things to what you should monitor. That model then transitions it to another model. This model now actually looks at the traffic on the network and the traffic that is happening with the actual things. It says, this is what you should look like. This is what you really look like. Now, the combination of that gives us the ability to understand that we either are or we are not in the posture that we think we are. Along with that, the ability to, we're monitoring the traffic, we're starting to look at as well as advanced techniques that an adversary uses. Typical security, cybersecurity was done by signatures and indicators of compromise, very static. The advanced adversaries right now are using advanced techniques that look normal in regular traffic. So independently by themselves, it would look normal. But when I step back and look at it as in context and look at it across the enterprise, it's what would look like normal behavior now suddenly becomes a malicious behavior. So Panoptic Junction is the ability to allow us to start taking a look at that. We built that over across the street inside the lab across the street and demoed it inside of the lab. We are now about to take that out to the enterprise as a whole and do a limited deployment to actually just show where we're at. It's not perfect yet. We're still in the case where it's not, I would say, at the level where I could do a full scale deployment, but I've got to be able to put it on a live network to be able to continue to tune and refine that, to get that technique down, so we get the ability of that to go down so we can continue to build that out. The next area is a partnership that we have with DARPA. So DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research and Program Agency. Think of it's the big think tank for the DoD as well. They are doing very similar efforts of being able to look at advanced techniques to not only detect an adversary, but also take a look at what data should you be using and to detect those adversaries. So this particular project is looking in not only understanding what's happening on our network, but also taking in context what's happening from an outside view as well. And then the correlation of that is now having us give us better insights to be able to detect advanced persistent threats. very hard, difficult to be able to do that at scale that we're talking about with our networks. The third area I'll talk about is more along the lines of the large language model. So we have developed what we call Camo GPT. Camo GPT is basically using the Mistral large language model, putting it inside of a secure environment. And so not only is we're using it for a large language model to basically ask DoD question or Army specific questions to help, I'll just say our workforce in general help out to relieve some of the burden and the tasks that they have on it. We're also looking at it as an opportunity of, okay, what things do we need to do from a security standpoint? How should that actually be deployed inside of our environments to ensure secure access of it, to ensure the privacy, to ensure the civil liberties, but also from our standpoint, we call it OPSEC. I would say, how do you protect the intellectual property? Because in some cases, as I go out to a typical Camo GPT, who's observing those questions that are being asked? And how are they actually using that data to do nefarious things either against me or against others in the observation of what's happening? So in many cases, companies don't realize, as I put in my corporate knowledge bank, if you will, into large language models that are out inside the public space, they're actually inadvertently releasing some intellectual property that they may or may not want to have available. And oh, by the way, if it's a self-learning model, that now is into the corpus of the next question. So if I were to go and ask the next question, hey, what's the intellectual property or whatever it is of somebody else, it has the potential of revealing it not only to the source, but to anybody else who goes back into those and starts querying against it as well. We're also using it to understand how do I deploy AI models, understanding that if I'm going to do this advanced analytics and I have to deploy it at scale across the Army, how do I do that? What's the cost of it? What's the deployment model? What's the base level piece that I've got to have the agility to be able to do it? So the model I need today is not the model I need tomorrow. I need to be able to quickly ingest and put that inside of the network. So part of it is not just the functional piece, but is also the operational piece of how to get to agility and scale of unknown AI that I'll need tomorrow, but I know I have to put that inside the enterprise at some point in the future. There's taking that, there was another effort we called Cyber Copilot. Cyber Copilot was an effort we did with the Cyber Center of Excellence, which is the organization that's responsible for the training of the cyber signal and electronic warfare soldiers. And we asked the basic question of, hey, how can we use a co-pilot for a student to be able to get a deeper understanding of whatever that skill set is that they need? So what we did is we took all the doctrinal, all the programmatics for the instruction, put it into the large language model, and then allow the soldiers then to go and just use it and ask it ChatGPT-like questions. Hey, what's the best way to deploy this particular radio? And we give it out. We did that in such a manner that's I wouldn't say necessarily a novel. It's novel for us from the standpoint of, hey, how are we using that to educate to help the soldiers? The test on that was to sit there and say, okay, can that large language model pass the final exam? And it did. And so it was valuable, but it's not necessarily something that you should be scared of. I think most of us, as you recall back into your math days, I don't think any of us, probably at least some over here, at least some of us never took the SAT with the calculator. Now calculators are common in school. So it's a tool that can be used to help accelerate and advance where you could not go before. That's how we look at AI. There's also dangers of, okay, can it be abused? Yes, it can absolutely be abused as well. The Camo GPT, not only was that for the soldiers, but now TRADOC is now looking at that to kind of flip the script a little bit. Not just for student use, but how can we rapidly create courseware for rapidly evolving doctrine so that now what would take normally about 12 to 18 months for a course to be developed is now being looked at as a very short time frame so that TRADOC can maintain pace with the changes that are happening on the battlefield and how we are deploying troops and soldiers and educating and training us. So that's a flip on kind of how it can be used in both ways, not just in the cyber, but also in the general space. Within the general space as well, I would also inform you that what else we're doing is how do we take AI for talent management? So we have a problem with inside the Army, I would argue, most businesses as well. How do you advertise for positions? How do you understand and quickly go through and create job descriptions? How do you create those advertisements quickly? In many cases, we end up pounding our head against the sand and kind of recreating the same thing over and over and over again. So we're looking at how do we use large language models to help us inject and inform what is that new job description? Where do we need to go to? How do I leverage somebody else's job description to be able to get similar things to what we're doing? And as I get resumes in, how do I cull through those resumes quickly to be able to identify those key pieces or the key resumes that are of value, which would kind of match to that area? There's some, as we went through the challenge work that we ran into civil liberties issues. As I go to the model, how do I make sure that I've got the right model trained on that? But also the data I'm using right now, the folks who injected the resumes, I got to anonymize them. Does the person who injected the resumes that's been anonymized, do they understand that their data is now being used to train the model? We elected not to go down that path, and instead we elected then to create synthetic resumes because we did not inform the folks that their data was going to be used for training. We elected not to go down that path. So we created synthetic resumes then to train our model on the synthetic resumes. But those are kind of considerations as we talk about the data privacy and that things that at least we're taking conscious efforts to try to make sure we're protecting the generalized civil liberties as best we can. I'll close away with a couple comments. I mentioned before that we're exploring the cost of AI. That cost of AI is not just the development of the models. It's what's the cost from a security standpoint. How do you get access to it? What's the right controls that are associated? Not all have to have, I'll say, high level controls. And it's just a graduated scale. So making a conscious effort to understand how do you get not only the access to the AI, control of who can use it, who can't use it, but also the data side, the data, what do you do with that as well? The OPSEC aspect or intellectual property, again, just want to highlight on that. The takeaways I would encourage is one, the transparency. So understanding the transparency of how the model was developed, where it was developed, was it validated by somebody? Or is it just I'll say a model that's out in the loop in the wild that there's nobody who's actually done some kind of validation of that model itself? So back to your trust question. Can I actually trust that model? And what's the level of the trust that's associated with that? The data that's used for development of that model as well. Understanding not just the model, but there's a data standpoint. So there's a model that I use that we, at least from our standpoint, we will develop the model with one, but then I have a different data set to validate the model. And having the two to understand so that we've got an ability and then throw on top of that a knowledge graph to give a better understanding. I don't think we'll ever be at 100%, but I think building those guardrails in, if you will, to make sure that there's a level of how do you characterize or qualify the validity of a particular model or the trustability of a model. Understanding these potential biases. So understanding the data and how the model was developed will help you understand where those potential biases are. And then also throw in, as you test it and validate it, throw in use cases you have not thought of that will sit there and determine whether the model is right. So in other words, how do you hack it to ensure that it is not going to be nefarious on unknown things? Things we plan for very well, we can make sure are correct. But it's the unknowns that you have to account for and assume somebody is going to misuse that model somewhere. So how do you try to predict and how do you try to predict those misuses to reduce that as to whatever? If it does get misused, what's the safety mechanisms for those? The final comment I'll provide is just again with the other folks back on the data side of the house, understanding the data that is being used and how it's being used is absolutely essential. It's not just about the AI, it's about the data. It really gets back to the data itself, whether the data inputs or the data outputs, and understanding how you protect those as well. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'll conclude my comments. Look forward to your questions.
Steve, that was another great presentation. We appreciate the very comprehensive amount of information put together. Heard many things. One of the things that I think you touched on is the bias. And that really does tie down to the cybersecurity of who has access, who's entering that potential bias in there. That's a big concern of mine. I always use the example, most recently, we've had some folks running for office where it asked, who should I vote for? And one said, I can't tell you who you should vote for. And the other one, and then they asked the other candidate, and that candidate came back with a glowing profile. So there's concerns that what should necessarily have an opinion has an opinion. And I also found it when I did it for myself. I decided in the 5 major ones, I'd look up myself. And it's interesting, I found the information to be mostly inaccurate, but not bad inaccurate. But they said I was from Illinois and I was a state rep before I did this and a background that wasn't congruent with what was true. Well, I educated it and immediately changed it. Well, that's scary too, which means anybody can update it. But I think we also have to separate the public facing systems, the ChatGPTs, the Bards, Claudes, Perplexities in the world, to the internal systems that people are using. Each one is equally important, has equal potential to be problematic. And with that, in some of the things I did recently, folks are almost looking at how do you have AI watching AI? So I'm curious if you've got any thoughts on that.
On the AI versus or AI watching over. So I think there are applications where I think it's valuable. It gets back into what's the trust mechanism and how do you do that? There are probably some use cases where it probably would not work. Part of the AI watching the AI, we're starting to explore that, and it gets back to the how do you trust and validate and verify. I think in general, I think there is yes, there is, but I think you've got to be overly cautious because now I got the AI watching the AI, but who's watching the watcher? And so it gets back into, at the end of the day, it's the validation and verification of the model and what the model is supposed to do. How do you ultimately have trust in that model? Whether the model is, if I don't have trust in in that model that's actually doing the watching, then I would argue that model is insufficient and it's not going to work.
Many challenges to overcome. Questions from the committee members? Brett?
Great presentation today, a lot of use cases. I think there's a lot that we can exchange between industry and what you guys are doing as well in terms of case studies. Part of what you talked about at the very beginning was talking about deep fakes. And what we've seen over the past even 3 weeks, a lot of models are coming out that you cannot distinguish the output from reality, really. And going back to Senator Burns' question about how do we trust the output of what we see now online? Brian Patterson in a previous briefing was talking about blockchain and use of that technology to help keep the chain of custody of a particular digital asset. Are you looking into such technologies to help rebuild trust in what we see online?
Yes, sir. There are efforts that are going on, I'll say within the DoD in itself to try to help determine, okay, I'll say a deep fake versus a non-deep fake to understand the advancing those and continue to trust. What I would say is that I think that from a commercial standpoint, community standpoint, one of the challenges becomes there's a scale, if you will. So I have an organization that should be a trusted organization. Are they doing deepfakes or not? Well, if you're going to use AI to generate something, enhance a video or something, then you should make a disclaimer on it that, hey, we went and did this. Here's the disclaimer that we've actually used, or there was AI that was assisted to generate whatever that is. Unfortunately, though, a lot of the deepfakes that are coming out are not necessarily coming out of what I would call reputable or trusted sources. They may be repeated by those or echoed by them, but the actual source of those is coming off from somebody who's much more nefarious, who's not, if they're nefarious, they're not going to sit there and tell you that they're using something that's a deepfake, if you will. So you get back into, so now if I'm going to repeat those things, are we sitting there and identifying, how do you identify it? Back to step one. Last year, we went out to Silicon Valley and we talked with a bunch of the leading tech giants inside of AI. They explained the rapid advances in AI as a hockey stick. So basically over the last 5 years, if you think about the blade of a hockey stick, there's been some slow advances on AI. They'll all of them claim that we are probably right almost on the curve where that curve will radically exponentially have have advances to the point where the advances we've seen in the last 5 years will happen in like 5 days. And then in the then 5 days after that, it'll happen in like 5 minutes. It's an over exaggeration, but I think you get the point is that those advances to be able to do those, it becomes now a cat and mouse game. So as I develop the technique to identify a deepfake, the deepfakes get better. It used to be about a year ago where you looked at a picture in a deepfake and you can kind of tell a couple telling tales of what it is. It's got 6 fingers. Gravity wasn't done well in deepfake, so you can see somebody with an eye that's out here like this. The eyeballs, when you look at the eyeballs and you look at the reflections aren't done very well. And there's some issues with some shadowing as well. That's where it was about a year ago. Most of those have been, now the technology has gotten to the point where it's very, very difficult. I can't give you a direct answer other than the fact that I know that the technology is going to constantly changing. I think for those who are using AI generated content, there should be a disclaimer somewhere that says at this point, hey, this was AI generated content, so that users are now aware. And that goes back to building the trust that AI created some kind of AI generated content, whether that was voice, that was narrative, or that was a video. There's now understanding that it was AI generated.
Other questions from the committee members? Representative Wiedauer.
That advancement or that efficiencies progressing and AI essentially being a new age arms race. Is there a feeling of where we are in that? Are we behind internationally?
I think there is, you go to the photos, we analysis, we consider the area of problems and like here. I would say that we're almost here for that. We are almost on that. And it is very again that we got. There are other things that don't have. One of the things that let's get at the end of the day, we want to on the problem and be able to do that. However, it's but you don't know what we look at. We all look at how do we improve our education and how there's also it's the soft skills as well. It's not a development, it's development, AI, it's not all people leverage have to be.
Other questions? Senator Burns.
Well, you are showing, and you do things and you do challenges of. And it's AI generated content. Here, the user knows that it's not, that it's AI.
I believe
If they can't be done, you would anticipate that the consumer would be able to determine whether or not the content was AI generated or whether there's fundamental sources that are not AI.
Yes, sir. I think it gets back to like a chatbot, for example. I'll just use the chatbot on a website.
Right.
So does the site that's using that disclose that it's actually a chatbot? Or do you actually think it's a human out of the drum? Yes, sir.
So should there be policy that would suggest that where AI is used as a response, it be
I would argue that it's probably a use case dependent. I'm not necessarily on the extremes, because if you say it's all that, then suddenly I think we kind of walk down a slippery slope that ends up being probably too costly prohibitive, and now suddenly we've gone into some trap that we probably want to back out of. And depending on the use case and what it is actually for, yes, I think there are certain cases where that should be done, absolutely. Particularly when you're talking about like privacy or public safety.
I want to shift gears to data for a second. Certainly, the military needs and requirements for data and information and policies are different, perhaps other sectors, non-defense sectors. Does the Defense Department have a set of standards and policies related to data that you follow and?
Yes, sir, we have multiple, and it depends on even area. So like, for example, I'll use the Intel community. Intel community is very, very tightly controlled about what it can and cannot do, particularly with regards to data. From a data privacy standpoint, absolutely. You heard Ernesto Cortez talk a little bit about PII or personally identifiable information. It's very clear around what we can and cannot do and how do we store and how do we retain that. To get that operational data, we do as well. Again, I would say we're not perfect, but I think we're pretty advanced on how we understand about protecting data. And it's protecting data from an intel oversight standpoint, protecting data from an operational standpoint, and protecting data from a civil liberty standpoint for soldiers and sailors and our employees as well.
Yeah, I see perhaps a different set of structure, policy structure for certain sectors, let's say law enforcement.
Yes, sir.
And the need for law enforcement to have information that perhaps would not necessarily be generally claimed. So would you suggest that there should be differentiation in how we treat various sectors, or do you believe that each sector?
Again, personal opinion, sir, I think there is value in addressing the data by sector because there are different use cases and understanding of how that data is used. For example, if I'm doing law enforcement versus business and marketing, there are going to be some difference on how I treat data between the two inside of those two different sectors. Absolutely.
Any further questions? Chairman Thomas.
Thank you. And this has been really some enlightening testimony. You hit on a couple of things that I've worked pretty heavily on over the last couple of years. You talk a lot about AI in the battlefield, and obviously we're not U.S. Congress, which is a much bigger conversation, but I found a lot of it to be enlightening. I mean, we're not going to talk about this today, but I'd love to follow up with you and talk about AI and the use of like manufacturing. And, I think about, the Korean War dropping leaflets over this is the new leaflet, right? So really fascinating stuff. But today, what I'm really focused on here and in the purview of what I can work on is more, democracy in general and the use of deep fakes and misinformation campaigns targeted at certain candidates. One of the big pushbacks that I got last year when I was running HB 986 was that they're not believable. You can't make a deep fake video that would be believable to the general public. Do you find that to be true, or do you think that there could be a believable deep fake put out with the technology as where it is as of today?
I think you can make things believable. And here's why I say you make believable. Believable to all, probably not. But if we look at individual perspectives themselves, what takes it to fool me is different than what it would take to fool you. So if I look at the general population at all, there's going to be some level of population that I can do I'll use the 6-finger person. Some part of the general population will see that and they'll see what they want to see and they'll believe it. There's another group, whether it's 10%, 80%, pick whatever, there's another group that will see it right away and like, nah, that's fake. So just like any other thing, whether it's truth or not, you're going to have believers and non-believers inside of that. I think the question is that whatever's being put out, is that believed by the population, the majority of the population? And then whether it's the deep fake itself is believed, I think there's also an echo chamber standpoint. You may tell me a story, or you may tell me whatever that is, even though I may not see it, because now it's second, third-hand information, but it's repeatable. And it's repeatable by me, which you trust me because of our relationship or whatever that happens to be. So it's a kind of a trick question, but
you're hitting on one of the 7 principles of persuasion is what you're talking about.
Yes,
Yeah. So my next question to kind of follow up on the first one is because one of my biggest concerns is always not that there's a deep fake comes out, but it comes out at a point where it's so close to the election that there's really no chance to stop the disinformation. Is there any recommended practices or, good practices that you have seen to help combat disinformation? Maybe, I hate to say, take a battlefield application and bring it to a democratic application, but maybe there is some crosstalk there. I mean, do you have any suggestions?
Part of it goes through as we see, I mean, as we look on the battlefield, even with battlefield, there's always verification. I've gotten an observation, I'll just say an observation in the battlefield, whether that's on the physical space or the information space. Generally, it's not a immediate assertion right away. How do I validate or verify? So if I see it, I'll just use a battlefield application of it. If I see a target on the battle space and I can say I detect that through signals intelligence, I don't trust the signal intelligence in the room by itself. I will send a different asset to confirm or deny what I saw, so I get a validation. So I have a secondary piece to look at it to ensure that, okay, is it actually what I suspected? I can call it a suspected, but at that point, it's suspected until I can validate and verify what it actually is. I think in the information space, I think the challenge right now is that the information space is so rapid and so fast, and that time cycle is so short. That's where the real challenge become. How can you detect those things, verify, validate that information before it explodes? And what I mean by before it explodes, before the echo chambers start getting it, because the time it takes to verify and validate right now, I'd say from a technical standpoint is a little bit time consuming and challenging. It can be done. But the problem is by the time that I do that in that time sequence, that story or whatever it is probably, the cat's already out of the bag, if you will. And then now you're in, how do I do damage control versus how do I identify any dysfunction or how do I prevent that happening?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any further questions? If not, we're going to move on and stay on track.
Okay, our next speaker is going to be Jake Denton with the Heritage Foundation.
Thanks, Steve. Great job.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Jake Denton. I'm a research associate with the Tech Policy Center at the Heritage Foundation. I want to first start by thanking you all for giving me the opportunity to share my perspective on data privacy and artificial intelligence today. While emerging technologies captivate our attention with the promise of a transformed future, enduring challenges like data privacy continue to pose significant risks to the American people. The digital era has ushered in an industry built around data collection, one that expands in scope and sophistication with alarming rapidity and touches every corner of this state, from Atlanta's tech hubs to your rural communities. Smartphones, smartwatches, and connected gadgets have become a conduit for relentless harvesting of our most intimate information. Our movements, preferences, and behaviors are meticulously tracked, cataloged, and analyzed, often without our explicit consent or even awareness. Concurrently, public spaces have evolved into vast data extraction zones. Advanced computer vision systems, often augmented with facial recognition capabilities, constantly monitor our cities, making surveillance and data harvesting nearly inescapable for the average Georgian. The scale and scope of this data collection apparatus are nothing short of staggering. Companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon have constructed intricate user profiles that encompass not only the online behaviors, but real-world activities. These profiles often include predicted or inferred data points of user preferences, financial status, or even health conditions, potentially influencing everything from job opportunities to insurance rates for Georgians. The integration of collected data with both inferred data points and information purchased from third-party data brokers further expands the depth and breadth of these digital dossiers. Every click made by a Georgian, every credit card purchase in a local store, and every social media post can be used for as fodder for complex algorithms that big tech has designed to predict and influence our behavior. One might assume that in the face of such unprecedented intrusions into our personal privacy, comprehensive federal legislation would exist to protect the rights and data of American citizens, including Georgians. Shockingly, this assumption would be incorrect. The federal government has failed in its duty to safeguard the digital rights of Americans, leaving our data vulnerable to exploitation. As companies increasingly integrate AI into their operations, from customer service chatbots to predictive analytics, the potential for misuse and privacy violations exponentially increases. The absence of federal guardrails means that Georgians face an ever-expanding landscape of data collection and processing, with AI systems potentially making consequential decisions based on this data without adequate oversight or transparency. In this context, it now falls to states like Georgia to take up the mantle of protecting their citizens from this digital onslaught, ensuring that the benefits of technological advancement do not come at the cost of fundamental privacy rights. To fully appreciate the urgency of this situation for Georgia's citizens, it is crucial to understand the pervasive and sophisticated nature of modern data collection practices. In today's digital ecosystem, data collection operates through a complex, multi-layered architecture of hardware, software, and network technologies that permeates every aspect of our increasingly digital lives. At the device level, a myriad of sensors such as accelerometers, gyroscopes, and ambient light detectors continuously gather physical data. Operating systems and applications interface with these sensors while also collecting user inputs, timestamps, and application usage metrics. Network-level collection occurs through packet inspection, DNS queries, and IP logging. Web browsers employ cookies, local storage, and session storage to persist user data, while server-side logging captures request headers, user agents, and interaction patterns. Advanced tracking utilizes techniques like browser fingerprinting, which creates unique identifiers based on device configurations, installed fonts, and plugin versions. Cross-device tracking leverages probabilistic matching algorithms to link user identities across platforms, often utilizing shared IP addresses or behavioral consistencies as correlation points. The scope of collected data is just as staggering as it is comprehensive. It encompasses not only our explicit inputs, but also our implicit behavioral patterns, our browsing histories, search queries, and purchase records, social interactions, content consumption habits, and even the rhythms of our keystrokes. Increasingly, biometric data, our facial features, voice patterns, and even the way we walk are being incorporated into this vast data pool. Through sophisticated aggregation and analysis, often executed by artificial intelligence, these disparate data points coalesce into highly nuanced psychographic profiles, enabling predictive modeling of behaviors and preferences with unprecedented accuracy. Now, if you found yourself confused by that barrage of technical jargon, rest assured that you are not alone. Yet here's the crux of our predicament. Despite this complexity, you have almost certainly provided affirmative consent to these very processes on at least one, if not all of your devices. This is precisely what makes the issue of data privacy unique. You, distinguished members of the legislature, along with your constituents, and indeed all of us in the room, are unwitting victims of this system. From a policy perspective, addressing this pervasive data collection presents significant challenges without a robust legislative framework. The current model of notice and consent, typically manifested in lengthy terms of service agreements, is fundamentally inadequate. Users are overwhelmed by the volume and complexity of these agreements, often consent without full comprehension of the implications. Moreover, the interconnected nature of data ecosystems means that even if a user opts out of data collection from one service, their information still may be captured through third-party data brokers or partner networks. The incentive structure for companies to expand the data collection is deeply entrenched in their business models. Data has become a primary driver in the digital ecosystem, fueling targeted advertising, product development, and strategic decision-making. The network effects and economies of scale in data accumulation create a self-reinforcing cycle where more data leads to better services, attracting more users, and generating even more data. Without legislative intervention to alter these incentives, companies will continue to push the boundaries of data collection, potentially eroding privacy to the point of practical non-existence. To rectify the current imbalance in data privacy and safeguard the rights of Georgia's citizens while fostering a robust business environment, a comprehensive data privacy legislative framework is imperative. As Georgia stands at the intersection of technological innovation and personal privacy, it has the opportunity to pioneer a landscape that respects individual rights and promotes responsible business practices, potentially serving as a model for other states and maybe the country. The cornerstone of this framework should be the mandate for transparent, accessible, and easily understandable disclosures. about data practices. From Atlanta's burgeoning tech sector to the small businesses along the coastline, Georgians deserve clarity on their data collection and usage practices. The current landscape of complex, jargon-filled privacy policies creates significant information asymmetry between companies and consumers. By requiring clear and concise disclosures, data privacy legislation has the potential to enable individuals to make truly informed decisions about their data sharing while providing businesses with unambiguous compliance guidelines. A fundamental aspect of data privacy protection is the empowerment of consumers through the right to access, delete, or correct personal data that has been collected, or in some cases inferred. This allows individuals to maintain control over their digital footprint and ensures data accuracy, addressing the growing concern of data determinism, where outdated or incorrect information significantly impact individuals' lives. For sensitive categories such as health information, financial data, or biometrics, a stringent opt-in consent requirement should be implemented. This approach shifts the paradigm from implicit acquiescence to explicit authorization. To complement these individual rights, legislation should also address the broader issue of data collection practices. Restrictions should be placed on the collection and use of user data, limiting it only to what is demonstrably necessary to provide the advertised service. This approach not only curbs excessive data collection, but also promotes responsible business practices, encouraging companies to be more judicious and transparent in their data utilization. To further bolster compliance and responsiveness to consumer concerns, a robust consumer complaint process should be established. This mechanism allows for Georgia's residents to report suspected violations directly to an oversight body for investigation, creating a direct line of communication between citizens and regulatory authorities. Additionally, companies operating in Georgia should be required to submit annual transparency reports detailing their data practices. The number of consumer requests received and fulfilled, complaints lodged, known breaches or violations, and other pertinent information. This regular reporting fosters a culture of ongoing compliance and provides valuable data for policymakers and the public. The implementation of effective data privacy legislation in Georgia becomes increasingly challenging with each passing day. The rapid advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning are poised to exponentially amplify data collection and analysis capabilities across critical sectors, including healthcare, finance, and transportation and education. As these technologies become more deeply integrated into our daily lives and business operations, the complexity of regulating them grow and the potential for privacy infringements expands. As AI systems become more deeply integrated into these domains, they will capture, process, and analyze increasingly detailed information about individuals' behavior, preferences, and characteristics. In healthcare, AI could process genetic data and lifestyle information to predict health outcomes. In finance, machine learning algorithms may analyze spending patterns and financial history with unprecedented precision. Transportation systems could track movement patterns and preferences of travelers, while educational AI systems could monitor learning behaviors and cognitive processes. This massive influx of detailed personal data necessitates an expeditious and proactive legislative approach that not only addresses current privacy concerns, but also anticipates complex challenges emerging from these data-intensive technologies. Further delaying action not only makes the task of crafting comprehensive legislation more difficult, but also increases the risk of entrenching problematic data practices. The longer we wait, the more our data becomes intertwined with complex systems and data sets, making it harder to implement meaningful changes without significant disruption. As Georgia considers data privacy legislation, several existing models offer valuable reference points. The Texas Data Privacy and Security Act presents a cogent framework for Georgia's policymakers to examine. Its comprehensive scope, irrespective of corporate revenue thresholds, coupled with a robust emphasis on consumer rights and consent mechanisms, provides a substantive foundation upon which Georgia can construct its own legislative framework. The implementation of comprehensive data privacy legislation not only safeguards the rights of Georgia's citizens, but also has the potential to significantly enhance the state's business environment, particularly in the technology sector. Clear and well-defined privacy laws establish a stable regulatory environment, reducing legal uncertainties and compliance risks for companies operating within the state. This regulatory clarity is especially appealing to technology firms and startups who often grapple with the complex and inconsistent privacy regulations across different jurisdictions. By establishing transparent guidelines and robust enforcement mechanisms, Georgia can position itself as a predictable and trustworthy business environment. This approach will attract privacy-conscious enterprises, fostering innovation and economic growth, while simultaneously ensuring that the privacy rights of Georgians are protected. As data becomes increasingly central to the digital economy, Georgia has the opportunity to lead by example, demonstrating that strong privacy protections and a thriving business ecosystem are not mutually exclusive, but rather mutually reinforcing pillars of a forward-thinking approach to governance in the digital age. Thank you all again for your time and granting me the opportunity to share my perspective on this emerging policy challenge, and I'm now happy to answer any questions you may have.
Quick question. Jake, thank you for the presentation. The European rules and regulations around data privacy have been with us for some time. For us at our company, we had to set up an entire team for data privacy. The regulations that have been signed and passed and now executed are pushing us to provide these types of reports. It can be pretty onerous, and there's a financial penalty for following these rules and regulations. It might be difficult for smaller companies to follow these types of rules and regulations. It's easier for us. We have the heft and the size to be able to comply, but that becomes a lot harder for smaller companies. So how do you balance the concept that we do need to have more ownership of our digital shadow, our digital rights, versus the burden that comes with overregulation around data privacy?
Yeah, I'll start by saying the unique situation you have with Europe's, whether it be the AI law or the GDPR or any of the other tech regulations, is that they're about 1 million pages long. There's all the appendices and these different things that require a very serious compliance team to sift through. We in the United States, especially at the state level, are not going to pass a 1,000-page privacy law. Things are going to be much more simple. The boundaries that companies will have to follow will be clear. And I think that's the beauty of our approach, what we can do here in the US versus what Europe is choosing to do over there. They have essentially given themselves a loose leash for selective enforcement. You go down the companies they've chosen to go after, and they're the usual suspects that they like to penalize. And it is basically the nature of their legislative strategy there. So I think if you err on the side of clarity, making these documents as small as possible, making clear guidelines like what Texas did, where, irrespective of the revenue threshold, but if you're handling sensitive data defined as biometrics and so forth, you have to follow particular guidelines on disclosures of what you're doing with such data and allow that person to back out. And you can do this in a matter of maybe 20 or 50 pages that you won't need a 100-person legal team to sift through. So I think that's really the difference here. They're trying to make things difficult. It's on purpose. It is not necessarily the model that we need to follow.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. I appreciate it. And I have to say, as I jotted down questions to ask, you then proceeded to answer them. But I did have 2 more questions. The oversight body that you were talking about in terms of the data, do you see that as being coming from government as providing that oversight? And is that how it's structured in Texas?
Yeah, so the oversight could come from an existing body within government. It's just allowing them to have jurisdiction. So I think of something along the lines of a commerce type department at the state level is, essentially overseeing the behavior. And I think that is probably the preferred model. I honestly am not sure where Texas has decided to place their oversight. I believe it is with the Attorney General's office, but I'd have to double check on that. But I'm pretty sure it's the AG.
Okay, and you mentioned Texas. Are there any other states that have implemented similar laws?
There are. I mean, California has a bill. It's far from perfect. I like Texas because it's the most recent. It was done with essentially AI in mind. You know, they're probably the first state that's passed something that was present in the moment, aware of the certain circumstances. I don't think California's has really scaled all too well. They don't even mention biometric data, if I recall. So things like that are omitted. And so there's a recency bias, I would say. So I would lean toward Texas. I don't feel comfortable necessarily recommending any other as a model.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We went to Mount Waters. You know, I think all the speakers, presenters who made sure I'm here for the rest of the day, means a lot. And they're in this very early, so thank you for that. One of the big things that I think spoke about today, which I think is one of the biggest concerns a lot of data privacy is the taking biometric data, specifically these smart city formats, and what's being done with it, how it's being held, and otherwise, it's two add, and then I'll just make one add, and take the next 3 meetings will be put up with the Senate on 10 and 3, which is virtual, or 10 to. And then the October 23rd and the November 8th meetings be joined. We will be doing a final meeting separate from the Senate in December. It will be a virtual meeting, so should be good attendance. Otherwise, we'll turn it over to Chairman Albers.
Thank you, Chairman Thomas. Great teamwork is that we smooth begin by mindful, passionate, everybody who made it possible for us to be today. All four leaders. The valuable insights and wisdom given to us will help shape our policy in the future. So we're getting the same thing. For our committee members and staff who helped out today, I want to thank all those who have participated helping us make this happen. We do have some lunch for those folks. So if you want to eat it here or take it in the car and back out, we understand. As Chairman Thomas mentioned, the next meeting is October 2nd. It will be virtual. We'll be sending information out to all three members, as well as everyone will get that through our own press channels. We do have a separate list of people who want ongoing communications about this committee. If you do not have your email as a part of that, please send it to Will Spencer right here, and he'll make sure you're getting those regular updates. As we end this committee meeting today, I want to say what I often repeat to everyone. This is the most important and impactful thing I think happened. And your Georgia General Assembly, also with all of our partners, are going to work tirelessly to make sure that we do our best to embrace this thing. We use the tremendous innovation solve some of our biggest problems on the same time, making sure we're protecting our governments, our families, businesses, nonprofits, and all the institutions that make Georgia number one place we live around. Thank you again for coming today. This meeting is your right here.
No.